"You're wasting your life, Caleb," Ryan said, smirking across dinner. "While we build empires, you'll draw cartoons in your basement." Derek laughed, clinking ice, loud enough to drown my voice. Aunt Denise smiled sadly, then looked away to protect herself. I swallowed pride like glass and tasted blood behind silence. That night, I promised my work would answer them without noise. Success would be my sermon, and silence would be scripture. Their laughter chased me home, but couldn't follow my future. I left the table early, pretending I had somewhere urgent. In truth, I only had paper, pencils, and stubborn hope. My mother stirred gravy, pretending the room wasn't collapsing quietly. She said nothing. Silence had always been our family's band-aid. Dad's photo watched us from the mantel, expression brave and distant. Ryan toasted to courage, meaning profits, bonuses, buildings with glass names. Derek compared quarterly gains like trophies, calling risk another word for art. I placed my napkin down, suddenly tired of being reasonable. "I'm opening a studio downtown," I said, voice even and small. Ryan smirked. "You want donations? Or just applause for courage?" Derek added. "Show me numbers, otherwise it's hobby life forever, man." Their words hit like hail, small stings that fell without mercy. After dinner, I packed my sketchbooks and left before dessert. Outside, Missouri air smelled like rain, hot pavement, and regret. I drove my rusted Civic past warehouses and river lights. My apartment was small, a rectangle with dreams taped everywhere. I spread pages across the floor, sketches breathing like caged birds. Words came with the images, short lines that steadied my hands. I wrote, "Keep going, even when going keeps breaking you." I wrote, "Build small, daily, before big becomes possible truth." I wrote, "Let silence carry what pride would only drop." The room felt like church, though I worshipped patience, not glory. Morning brought doubt with coffee, heavy and bitter on tongue. I posted sketches online, and cousins replied with laughing emojis. Ryan forwarded startups, captioned, "Real opportunities." I left it unread. Derek texted, "Grow up, man. Rent ain't paid by crayons." I blocked them both, then unblocked, unsure which hurt more. Work at the copy shop cut hours without apology that month. The landlord slid a notice under my door like winter. I prayed without words, just breath counted carefully to 10. I vowed again to build steady, even if nobody watched. Faith felt like hunger, sharp and honest, impossible to ignore. We grew up in Liberty, Missouri, ranch houses and ball games. Ryan chased trophies. Derek counted money. I drew in bleachers. Dad clapped for everyone, then squeezed my shoulder with pride. "Art feeds the world quietly," he whispered, breath smelling like spearmint. After he died, the house leaned hard into achievement noise. Ryan filled his room with blueprints, framed and spotlighted nightly. Derek stacked stock guides like bricks, building castles against fear. I kept sketchbooks under bed, pages humming with secret prayers. Mom tried fairness, but grief made fairness stumble and fall. When I chose art college, they called it adolescent rebellion therapy. I toured a vacant storefront near Troost, windows dusty and cracked. The landlord said, "Foot traffic's weak," like warning with kindness. I said, "I'll create traffic," though my wallet disagreed loudly. He shrugged, offered a deal, month to month with sweat equity terms. I signed, hands shaking, heart steady, eyes bright with terror. I painted walls white, then taped grids for hanging frames. Friends were few, but the barista across street helped sometimes. She said, "Name's Jenna, neighbor discount for caffeine and courage." I smiled, grateful, feeling community like stitching through open seams. At night, I lettered quotes beneath sketches, sentences short and honest. Opening day arrived, rainy and slow, footsteps rare on sidewalk. I brewed cheap coffee and spun the sign to open. Hours passed like glaciers, melting dollars into puddles of fear. 2 teenagers wandered in, asked directions, then left embarrassed quickly. I imagined Ryan laughing, Derek calculating failure rates for fun. By dusk, Jenna arrived with muffins, calling them survival taxes. "Give it time," she said, wiping a frame with sleeve. I nodded, though my chest felt hollowed by quiet sales. Before closing, a child pressed her face to the window. She pointed at a dog sketch, then disappeared with parents. I locked up and listened to rain drum on awning. Inside, the room smelled like paint, coffee, and stubbornness tonight. I sat on the floor, back against tomorrow's empty wall. I whispered, "You chose this, so choose it again, Caleb." My phone buzzed. Ryan sent a champagne photo with caption. "Empires, remember?" he wrote, and Derek clicked like instantly there. I deleted it and opened a new notebook labeled Begin. I wrote, Stand steady. Tomorrow learns from stubborn hearts tonight. I wrote, build true. Truth outlives every clever performance always. I turned off lights, praying work would answer laughter with grace. Winter came early that year, wind cutting through thin windows like knives. The studio lights flickered low, each bulb humming a tired apology. Bills stacked on my desk, envelopes red with warning and defeat. I tried painting joy, but the canvas only bled worry and gray. Sales were slow, maybe 3 prints a month if luck smiled. Jenna stopped by sometimes, her laughter the only heat in the room. You're building something, she'd say. It just hasn't learned to breathe yet. I'd smile, hiding the rent notice folded in my pocket. Nights stretched too long, mornings arrived too soon, and courage thinned. I told myself every masterpiece begins with a mistake that refuses to die. When February came, I ran out of coffee, paint, and faith together. The landlord gave me a week to clear out the studio space. I boxed my sketches, each page whispering, "You tried, you really did." I sold my easel for gas money and loaded my Civic again. The back seat became home. Blanket, notebooks, old markers, quiet dignity. I parked behind a laundromat near downtown Kansas City. Steam from dryers fogged the windows, turning the car into a ghost. Nights were cold enough to see breath, but not enough to quit. I drew by streetlight, gloves cut at the fingertips for grip. Failure had a taste now, a metallic, like coins and shame. Days blurred into one another, anchored only by the sound of traffic. I'd wake to the hiss of buses, engines coughing near dawn. Sometimes I washed up at a gas station sink, avoiding mirrors. I still sketched daily. Dogs, faces, buildings, hands, anything alive. It wasn't about selling anymore. It was just to remember I could. Once I caught my reflection on a storefront glass and didn't recognize it. My eyes had lost sparkle, replaced by something quieter, deeper. People walked by without seeing me, and maybe that was mercy. I wasn't jealous of their warmth, just grateful for their blindness. The world moved on, and I was learning to move slower. One night, rain came hard, hammering metal roofs and my windshield. I parked beneath a bridge, headlights from trucks flashing across walls. I was sketching a stray cat when I heard a soft voice. "Mister, can you draw my dog?" a little girl asked shyly. She stood under a yellow umbrella, her mother watching from the curb. I smiled, rolling down the window halfway, sketchbook already open. "Sure," I said. "Tell me his name." "Buddy," she answered, holding up a wet photo. I drew quickly, lines flowing without thought. Heart steady for once. When I handed it over, her eyes lit up like sunrise. Her mother tucked a $10 bill into my palm, whispering, "That's beautiful." I watched them walk away, the girl turning once to wave. That single smile pierced through months of noise and hunger. It reminded me that worth isn't decided by applause or success. That night, I slept with the sketchbook on my chest, warmth returning slowly. The bridge didn't feel like failure anymore. It felt like beginning. Sometimes hope comes small, quiet, wrapped in a child's thank you. I whispered, "All right, God, I'm not done yet," into the dark air. My stomach still growled, but my spirit finally exhaled again. Even broken dreams can glow when seen by innocent eyes. The next morning, I drew at the park. Sunlight thin but golden. People noticed, joggers, dog walkers, baristas carrying trays from nearby shops. One man stopped, asked, "Do you sell those?" I blinked, surprised, then nodded. He bought 2 sketches and asked for more next week. I sat there long after he left, hands shaking from disbelief. It wasn't much, maybe $40, but it felt like resurrection. I walked to the diner that night and ordered pancakes proudly. Jenna happened to be working there now, eyes wide. When she saw me, "You're still standing," she said, setting down the plate. "Guess art pays rent after all." I laughed, almost believing it. Word spread quietly, the way good rumors often do in small towns. People came by the park asking for portraits, pets, anything real. My fingers cramped, but my heart stretched with each pencil stroke. I earned enough to afford a cheap room above a laundromat. The hum of dryers at night felt like applause I'd waited for. I hung my drawings along the walls, imperfect but alive again. Each sketch whispered that I wasn't the failure they named me. It wasn't success yet, but it was movement, it was breath. I no longer chased revenge, I chased creation, the truest rebellion. And creation, I realized, is the quietest kind of victory. Still, sometimes, I'd see Ryan's car in dreams, gleaming black and loud. I'd wake sweating, wondering if he ever thought of that dinner night. But morning light always reminded me that shame couldn't follow sunrise. I'd pour cheap coffee and sketch until my knuckles stiffened. Every new piece felt like rewriting their laughter into poetry. I didn't want their validation anymore. I wanted self-respect. Maybe that was revenge, becoming everything they said I couldn't. The city outside my window hummed with stories I hadn't lived yet. My chapter wasn't over. It was just getting quiet enough to begin. And this time, I wouldn't stop until silence spoke louder than pride. Spring came soft that year, with sunlight thin as watercolor. I walked through the city carrying my sketchbook and leftover courage. The laundromat's hum below my room became my new morning rhythm. I started drawing flyers for nearby shops, simple designs for simple pay. "You've got an eye," said Mr. Grant, owner of a printing shop. He offered me weekend hours cleaning ink rollers and sorting paper stacks. The pay was small, but the smell of ink made me feel alive. I spent nights teaching myself Photoshop on an old laptop from a pawn shop. Tutorials became my mentors, mistakes my teachers, silence my applause. I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was chasing usefulness. Mr. Grant noticed I stayed late, fixing prints nobody asked about. "You want to learn the machines?" he asked one night, holding coffee. "I do," I said, brushing ink from my wrist like sweat. He laughed softly. "Then stop acting like an intern and start acting like an artist." I froze at that word, not used to hearing it without mockery. From then, I watched every step, every calibration, every lever pull. Within months, I could run half the floor blindfolded if needed. I didn't talk much, but my work spoke for me. "You remind me of myself at 25, he told me once. "Except you've got more patience. That's rare and dangerous." I started taking commissions quietly. Logos for cafes, signs for barbershops. My designs were simple, honest, but they carried warmth in the lines. I'd slip quotes beneath each one, small messages hidden in borders. Things like, "Work hard quietly," "Storms respect silence," or "Grace is louder than pride." People began noticing, asking who wrote those words. "Some artist from the print shop," they'd say, never naming me. I liked it that way. Anonymity was peace after years of mockery. But one afternoon, my design appeared on a city banner downtown. I stood there in traffic, staring at it, heart rising like dawn. For the first time, the city felt like it had whispered back. I walked to a diner later, the same one Jenna managed now. She wiped the counter and grinned when she saw me standing there. "You again," she said. "Still turning scraps into beauty, huh?" "Trying," I said, sliding into a booth by the window. She set down pie and coffee without asking, saying, "You're doing good things." "You think?" I asked, half smiling, half disbelieving still. "I know," she said. "Your art's on the banner outside my bus stop." My fork froze midair. I hadn't expected that reach. "It's small," I murmured, and she shook her head. "Everything starts small. Even miracles need somewhere to land." Weeks turned to months, and the shop became my second home. I saved every extra dollar, stacking it in envelopes under floorboards. My sketches filled notebooks until pages bent from humidity and use. I entered a local design contest with hesitation and borrowed confidence. The prize wasn't much, just recognition and a new computer. Ryan would have laughed. "Participation awards for dreamers," he'd say smugly. But when my name was called at the ceremony, I didn't hear laughter. I heard Dad's voice instead, gentle and sure, whispering, "You're getting there." I went home that night and cried, not from joy, but from release. Failure had finally let go of my throat. Still, success was fragile, easily shaken by memory and doubt. I received a message from Derek, short and polished as always. "Heard you're doing art stuff," it read. "You should post more." I almost laughed. The same brother who mocked my choices now watching quietly. I replied with nothing, choosing peace over conversation again. But I screenshotted it, just to remind myself how far I'd come. Every insult they once threw at me had become my foundation stone. When they said I'd never last, I built endurance. When they said I'd fail quietly, I built strength in silence. Sometimes their voices still echoed, but they sounded smaller now. I began freelancing under the name Monroe Design and Print. It wasn't a company yet, just me, my laptop, and 2 tired hands. Local businesses hired me, word spread, and the requests grew steady. People liked that I met deadlines without talking too much about it. My designs weren't fancy, just honest, clean, and deeply human. I added quotes again, my own words stitched between color and space. "Simple, speaks louder when spoken with heart," I wrote on one. Clients began sharing them online, tagging my tiny account with praise. I didn't correct their spelling when they called me inspiring. I just kept working, because that was the only sermon I knew. One night, while I was cleaning up the shop, Mr. Grant called me over. "You ever thought about starting something of your own?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said. but I'm not sure I'm ready. He smiled, sliding a key across the counter toward me. That's for the back room. Use it after hours, call it practice. I stood there stunned, words caught between gratitude and disbelief. You earned it, he said. Don't waste what effort built. I walked into that room later, lights dim, air smelling like ink. It felt like stepping into destiny wearing borrowed shoes. For the first time, fear felt like freedom instead of failure. I worked there night after night, printing small runs of my own art. Posters, postcards, quotes. Each piece spoke like quiet confessions. Jenna stopped by sometimes, bringing coffee and folding boxes beside me. You look different, she said one evening, watching me stack prints. Maybe I finally became who I was trying to be, I said softly. She nodded, smiling the way people do when they believe in you. Keep going, she whispered. You're building more than a business now. I didn't know what she meant until months later, when orders doubled. My name, once a punchline at dinner, was starting to mean something. Summer rose hot and golden over Kansas City, baking sidewalks until they shimmered. I worked through every dawn and dusk, hands stained with ink and hope. The back room of Grant's shop became more than a workspace. It became my world. Posters, prints, and half-finished sketches covered the walls like growing skin. Orders trickled in through social media, small businesses and community events first. You've got a following now, Jenna said, counting change at the counter. Feels strange, I replied. They're not following me, they're following the work. She smiled. That's better. Work doesn't disappoint people like fame does. Her faith in me grew roots where doubt once lived. I was still broke, but I was rich in direction. The more I worked, the more I saw design as language. Colors spoke where I couldn't. Lines confessed what words avoided. Clients came for art, but stayed for meaning stitched into it. You really believe this stuff, don't you? One customer asked, holding a poster. If I don't, I said, no one else will. My quotes started appearing in coffee shops, classrooms, even tattoo parlors. People tagged me online, calling me the quiet philosopher. I laughed the first time, unsure whether to feel pride or fear. Silence had built me. Now it was speaking for me. Even Ryan and Derek couldn't compete with something built from belief. They built profit margins. I built resonance, and resonance doesn't crumble in storms. Grant's health started fading mid-year, his steps slower, his breath shorter. One night after closing, he handed me a folder labeled Legacy. You'll take this place when I'm gone, he said. No hesitation, no test. You don't owe me that, I said, throat tight as wire. No, he said. I owe you proof that good work outlives its maker. I sat there speechless, the hum of machines louder than breath. Promise me, he whispered. Keep it about people, not money. I promise, I said, the words heavier than any oath before. When he passed months later, I locked the doors and cried on the floor. Grief came quietly, like gratitude in disguise. The shop became Monroe Studio and Printworks, the name painted fresh above glass. I kept Grant's old desk and the same chipped coffee mug beside it. Business grew steady, honest, loyal, like the people who believed early. Jenna became my partner in paperwork, coffee, and laughter. She said, "You built this from ashes." And I said, "No, from silence." I started hiring local teens, kids who needed a start like I once did. "You're good at this," one said. "You talk like you've lived twice." I smiled. Maybe I failed enough times to count as 2 lives. They listened, not like employees, but like witnesses. The studio pulsed with purpose, the kind that doesn't fade with money. Then came the first viral post, unexpected, raw, and world-changing overnight. A photo of one of my posters. They mocked my choices. Now they quote my words. Someone uploaded it, tagged unknown artist, and the internet caught fire. Tens of thousands shared it, from poets to athletes to teachers. My inbox overflowed with requests, offers, and praise I didn't know how to handle. Jenna nearly cried reading the messages out loud at midnight. "You said that years ago," she whispered, "back when nobody listened." "Guess silence finally found an audience," I said softly, almost afraid. I didn't post corrections or seek credit immediately. It wasn't about that. Still, deep down, I hoped my brothers had seen it too. A week later, Ryan called for the first time in 6 years. "Hey," he said, voice oddly cautious. "Saw something online. Was that you?" "Maybe," I said, leaning back, trying to sound indifferent. "It's everywhere," he said, half proud, half confused. "That quote's genius." "Thanks," I replied. Funny how time turns laughter into echo. He laughed nervously, not catching the weight beneath it. "Mom keeps saying she always knew you'd make something." "She didn't," I said gently, but she believed eventually. There was silence then. Long, awkward, necessary. You ever think of collaborating? He asked suddenly. I smiled. We already did. You gave me motivation. He didn't laugh this time. By fall, interviews started flooding in. Local news, podcasts, art magazines. You're inspiring a generation of creators, one journalist said. I'm just painting what pain taught me, I answered honestly. My quotes were everywhere now, etched into murals and printed on t-shirts. A college professor even used one in his ethics lecture. You've become a voice of truth, he wrote in an email later. I didn't feel like a voice, just a survivor with a pen. My studio became a sanctuary for those chasing meaning over fame. People walked in seeking art, but left carrying fragments of hope. I realized success wasn't revenge, it was restoration. One evening, Jenna closed the shop early and found me sketching alone. You still working this late? She asked, flipping the sign to closed. I don't know how to stop, I said, smiling faintly. Then don't, she said. Just don't forget to live between pages. Her words stayed with me as I walked home under streetlights. I thought of Dad's voice, soft as a hymn in memory. Art feeds the world quietly. Maybe he'd been right all along. Maybe that was our family's real inheritance. Ryan and Derek built towers. They reached higher, but I reached deeper. Depth lasts longer than height because it survives the fall. And I'd already fallen once. I wasn't falling again. By year's end, Monroe Studio and Print Works was a name people respected. I spoke at a community center once, trembling but sincere. Failure isn't the opposite of success, I told them. It's the foundation of it. The room was quiet, eyes fixed, hearts open, and I felt peace. The boy once mocked for dreaming too small now shaped others' dreams. Ryan texted again that night, a screenshot of my quote trending. You've become the family philosopher, he wrote, adding a laughing emoji. I didn't reply. I didn't need to anymore. Their laughter had built my fire. Now, it warmed others. Sometimes silence doesn't just finish the fight. It wins it quietly. Autumn found me at the edge of something larger than I'd ever imagined. The studio hummed with motion, printers running, people laughing, life moving. We weren't just making art anymore. We were building meaning that breathed. A nonprofit reached out, asking to feature my work in a youth mentorship program. Your words are teaching kids more than lectures ever could, the director said. Hearing that made my chest ache in the best possible way. I'd once been that kid, small, unsure, begging the world to listen. Now I was helping others find their own language in silence. It felt like everything painful had finally found a purpose. I began writing short essays to go with each print, reflections on failure and growth. I never called them lessons, just fragments of what survival had taught me. Pain is just potential waiting for direction, I wrote on one. Purpose doesn't roar. It hums beneath the noise, said another. People began sharing them like mantras, reposting with captions about healing. My name started appearing beside the words, and that scared me a little. Fame was something my brothers craved. I'd seen what it did to truth, but this was different. Not fame, just connection, quiet and human. Jenna said, "You were always supposed to speak. You just needed silence first." I realized she was right. Silence had been my apprenticeship all along. That winter, I was invited to speak at a creative arts conference in Chicago. The invitation letter made my hands tremble as I held it. Keynote speaker, it read, and I laughed out loud at the absurdity. I, the man who once lived in a car behind a laundromat, now had a stage. The night before the event, I sat in my hotel room staring at the skyline. I rehearsed my story out loud, voice shaking but steadying with each word. They mocked my choices, I said to the window, but those choices built me. The next morning, the hall filled with hundreds of faces, strangers waiting for my truth. I took a breath, stepped forward, and let every scar speak proudly. I used to believe failure was permanent, I began, voice clear as glass, but it's just a season, and no season lasts forever. The room hushed, cameras ready, but I didn't care about being recorded. I told them about the studio, the bridge, the rain, the little girl. I told them about Ryan and Derek, not as villains, but teachers of resilience. Every insult became a seed, I said, and I just kept watering. People nodded, some cried, some smiled quietly like they'd been seen. When I finished, the applause felt less like noise and more like closure. For the first time, I wasn't defending my choices, I was defining them. After the speech, a publisher approached me, business card crisp and expectant. "Your words need pages," he said. "Something people can hold and return to." I hesitated. Writing had always been private, sacred, not performance. But Jenna nudged me gently when I told her about it later. "Maybe it's time," she said. to let your silence travel farther. So I wrote, nights spent with coffee, notebooks, and quiet honesty. The book became Paper Walls, a collection of short reflections and sketches. Each page carried something I'd once needed to hear myself. When it launched, I expected nothing, but sometimes nothing grows louder than applause. Paper Walls sold faster than anyone predicted, climbing quietly through word of mouth. Teachers read it in classrooms. Parents quoted it to their kids. Messages flooded in from veterans, artists, and broken hearts alike. Your words kept me alive this week, one woman wrote in shaky pen. I sat at my desk reading until my eyes blurred from gratitude. The same sentences my brothers once laughed at, saving strangers now. Fame didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility, heavy but beautiful. I never chased it, and maybe that's why it found me. When life finally stops shouting, truth starts whispering, and people listen harder. The book wasn't revenge, it was revelation. Ryan called again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. "Caleb," he said, voice softer than I remembered. "Mom won't stop talking about you." I smiled faintly, unsure whether to thank him or stay quiet. "Your book's everywhere," he continued. "Derek's kids quote you at dinner." That line almost made me laugh. Poetic irony with a twist of grace. "They mocked my choices," I said, "but now they quote my words." He chuckled, though I could hear something breaking under it. "Guess you were right, huh?" he said, almost whispering. "No," I answered. I was just patient. We didn't hang up angry this time, only quiet, like two men finally tired of pride. Weeks later, I stood at a bookstore in downtown Kansas City, signing copies. The line stretched past shelves, faces blending into one long wave of humanity. A man approached slowly, familiar posture, eyes lowered in guilt. Ryan stood there holding a copy of Paper Walls, cover bent from use. "Didn't think you'd recognize me," he said, voice thick. "You're hard to forget," I answered gently, signing his name on the title page. "You wrote something that changed me," he said, almost trembling. "You sure it wasn't me that changed?" I asked, half smiling. He laughed through tears, nodding like he finally understood. That night, forgiveness didn't need to be spoken. It just existed between us. By the time spring returned, life had softened into something I didn't expect. The studio expanded, hiring more locals, turning art into livelihood for many. Jenna became my partner in more ways than business, steady and patient. People still sent letters, stories of redemption, loss, and rebuilding through my words. I never stopped sketching. I never stopped writing either. But sometimes I'd stare at the horizon and think of that dinner table, how one night of humiliation had birthed years of purpose and grace. I didn't hate my brothers anymore. They'd given me the raw material for meaning. Pain was clay, time was the sculptor, silence was the fire. And somehow, the sculpture turned out beautiful in the end. The invitation came in a cream envelope with gold lettering and too much perfume. "Ryan and Emily Monroe cordially invite you to celebrate 20 years of success." I stared at it for a long time, the ink blurring where my thumb rested. It wasn't the kind of event I ever imagined attending again. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, said I should go. The venue was a downtown hotel ballroom, the kind with mirrors and champagne. I ironed my one good suit, the same one I wore at my first speaking event. Jenna offered to come, but I told her I needed to face it alone. "Then walk tall," she said, kissing my forehead. "Let silence do the talking." I smiled. Silence had always spoken better than I could. When I arrived, a valet opened my door like I was someone important. The lobby smelled of roses and ambition, just like my brother's old dreams. I walked in, and heads turned, whispers trailing like the aftertaste of surprise. My photo had been in magazines recently. Some people recognized me instantly. I signed one program just to break the tension, half amused by it all. Inside, chandeliers shimmered above polished marble, and voices rehearsed for approval. Ryan stood near the stage, suit sharp, hair grayer at the sides. Derek worked the crowd, handshake and smile still perfectly rehearsed. For a second, I almost saw us as kids again, running barefoot across fields before pride built fences. Then Ryan's eyes found mine, and time folded in on itself. He crossed the room with a hesitation that didn't match his polished walk. "You came?" he said softly, disbelief hiding behind his professional grin. "You invited me," I replied, calm but distant. "I wasn't sure you'd want to," he admitted, shifting weight awkwardly. "Curiosity wins sometimes," I said, trying to keep it kind. He nodded, glancing around, lowering his voice near the buffet table. "You look good, Caleb," he said, words tasting foreign in his mouth. "You too," I said, and for the first time, it wasn't a lie. Age had softened him, the edges of arrogance rounded by quiet regret. Still, I felt the ghost of that dinner years ago humming between us. The program started. Speeches, toasts, carefully curated nostalgia. Ryan spoke about teamwork, vision, and persistence, like he'd invented endurance. Derek joked about humble beginnings, while the audience chuckled dutifully. When Ryan said, "Our father taught us hard work builds legacy," I almost laughed. He hadn't mentioned Dad once at the funeral. Not once. My table was near the back, beside strangers who whispered my name. "You're the writer, right?" one asked, eyes wide with recognition. "Just someone who draws words," I answered, smiling modestly. When Ryan quoted a line from Paper Walls in his speech, "Grace is louder than pride," I froze. The audience clapped, but he never looked at me as he said it. After the applause, he stepped off stage and came straight toward me. "That line," he said, "you wrote it, didn't you?" I nodded, unsure where this was heading. "I've been thinking about it for months," he confessed quietly. "It's changed the way I see things, the way I lead." His honesty startled me more than the confession itself. "You used to say silence was weakness," I reminded him. "I was wrong," he said simply, voice trembling just slightly. "Turns out silence is strength when words can't fix what's broken." I looked at him then, really looked. Not the brother who mocked me, but the man who finally understood me. Sometimes time does what apologies never could. Derek joined us a few minutes later, holding a glass of whiskey half full. "Well, if it isn't the family prophet," he said, trying humor but failing. "Guess all that drawing paid off, huh?" I met his eyes. No anger left, just quiet memory. "Eventually," I said, "but not the way I expected." He sighed, shoulders lowering, a weight slipping through his designer jacket. "You made it further than either of us," he admitted. "Not further," I said, "just somewhere different." He nodded, eyes glistening before he looked away. "You ever think Dad would be proud?" he asked softly. "I think he already was," I answered. "He just didn't live long enough to prove it." Later during dinner, our mother found me sitting near the back again. "My boys," she whispered, hands trembling as she touched my shoulder. "It's good to see all three of you in the same room again." Her hair had gone white, but her eyes still held that gentle fire. "You've been reading your son's words, I hear," I teased lightly. She smiled. "Every night. Your book sits on the table where your father's photo used to." I swallowed hard, surprised by how much that sentence hurt and healed at once. "He'd have liked that," I said quietly. "So do I," she added. "You wrote what I couldn't say." I realized then that forgiveness doesn't always sound like "I'm sorry." Sometimes it just sounds like love, learning to speak again. The night ended with laughter, clinking glasses, and a live band playing softly. Ryan and Derek stood together, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling small but real. I watched them from the balcony, city lights glittering through glass behind them. I didn't feel anger anymore, or pride, just release, calm, and deep. Ryan caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass. I lifted mine back, a silent toast to everything we survived. For the first time, we weren't competitors, or strangers, or cautionary tales. We were just three men finally tired of proving ourselves right. The crowd applauded something on stage, but I was too lost in peace to notice. Silence, once my shield, had become my language of forgiveness. When I left, the night air was cool, the city humming soft and slow. Ryan walked me out to my car, hands in his pockets like old times. "You ever get tired of being right all along?" he asked, smiling faintly. "Never was about being right," I said, "just about not giving up." He nodded, glancing at the stars, maybe searching for our father up there. "You think he saw tonight?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said, starting the engine, "and he probably smiled when you quoted me." Ryan laughed then, a real laugh this time, unburdened at last. As I drove away, the city lights blurred like tears I wasn't ashamed to feel. A week after the celebration, Ryan called and asked to meet for coffee. His voice sounded different this time, quieter, almost fragile around the edges. I agreed, mostly because I didn't want guilt hanging between us any longer. We met at a small cafe near Union Station, the kind with mismatched chairs. He was already there when I arrived. No tie, sleeves rolled, eyes tired. "You look human," I said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. He laughed weakly. "Guess success isn't great at keeping people warm." There was a pause as he stirred his coffee longer than needed. "I owe you a lot," he said finally. "More than you'll ever believe." I didn't answer. Sometimes silence invites truth faster than words do. He talked for nearly an hour, each sentence a slow unwrapping of regret. "I chased numbers so long I forgot they don't hug you back," he said. "Everything I thought mattered just kept slipping through my hands." He told me about losing investors, sleepless nights, and a marriage cracked by distance. "I thought I was strong," he said, "but really I was just scared." I listened quietly, not out of pity but understanding. The man who once mocked my dreams now envied the peace they gave me. You built something real, he said, voice shaking. And I built something that disappears every time the market sneezes. His eyes met mine, red and raw, and for once, he didn't look superior. He looked small, human, and free of armor. Derek joined us halfway through, surprise flickering when he saw me sitting there. This feels like an intervention, he joked, but his tone didn't carry arrogance anymore. He sat, ordered black coffee, and stared into it like confession lived at the bottom. You know, he said finally, I read your book, twice actually. I raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to believe him. I didn't get it the first time, he admitted. The second time I did. Ryan smirked softly. Which part? Derek sighed. The one that said, success without peace is just noise with better lighting. That hit hard. I chuckled faintly. I hadn't written it for them, but maybe it was always meant for them too. Guess even noise learns to listen eventually, I said, smiling sadly. Derek leaned back, rubbing his face as if the years weighed too heavy. I thought you were foolish for choosing art, he said quietly, but you found a way to make meaning out of pain. He looked around the cafe like it held answers he'd missed all his life. I don't know how to live without competition, he confessed, voice breaking slightly. You learn to create instead, I said. It feels different, softer, but deeper. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening under the warm light. I'm sorry, Caleb, he whispered, for that night, for the years, for all of it. Ryan's hand trembled as he reached for his cup. Me too, he said softly. We were cruel when you needed support. I didn't say it out loud, but in that moment, I forgave them both completely. We sat in silence for a while, the air thick but calm. Outside, trains passed slowly, their low rumbles shaking cups on the table. Do you ever hate us? Ryan asked suddenly, barely above a whisper. No, I said after a long pause. You just gave me different teachers. He frowned, confused, and I smiled faintly. Failure, hunger, loneliness, they all taught me what you couldn't. Derek exhaled, his laugh breaking halfway through. So, we're part of your success story? He asked, half joking, half hopeful. In a way, I said. You helped me build the silence that saved me. Ryan looked down, then nodded, eyes shining with something like gratitude. Maybe forgiveness doesn't erase guilt. It just teaches it to sit quietly. A few days later, Derek came by the studio, unannounced, but not unwelcome. He wandered through the rows of prints, his footsteps careful and reverent. It's peaceful here, he said softly, touching one of the framed quotes. Feels like walking through a church made of second chances. I smiled. That's what it's supposed to feel like. He paused at a poster that read, Don't prove them wrong. Prove yourself right. You really believe that? He asked, and I nodded. I had to, I said. Believing anything else would have broken me. He turned slowly, face heavy with unspoken emotion. I used to think pride made us strong, he murmured, but it just made us deaf. That line stayed with me long after he left. Ryan visited one evening, bringing Mom along, her hands holding a small wrapped box. You've done something beautiful here, she said, looking around the studio walls. Dad would have been proud, she whispered, eyes wet. I opened the box. Inside was his old wristwatch, worn leather band and faded dial. He wanted you to have it, she said softly. I just didn't know when it was time. My throat tightened as I fastened it around my wrist, the ticking faint but steady. Ryan watched, his expression somewhere between guilt and peace. You earned it, he said quietly, voice trembling at the edges. For once, he didn't sound like my brother the rival, just my brother the man. That night, after they left, I sat alone under the glow of the studio lamp. The watch ticked softly beside the hum of the machines, two rhythms merging. I thought of Dad, of his lessons about dignity and stillness. He used to say, pride makes noise, love makes rhythm. Now, I finally understood what he meant. My brothers had spent years chasing noise, while I'd spent years learning rhythm. And now, we all sat somewhere in between, not winners or losers, just survivors of ourselves. I wasn't angry anymore. There was no need to be. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't letting someone off the hook. It's taking yourself off it first. When I finally turned off the lights, the city outside was silent and still. The watch ticked like a heartbeat, each second another breath of closure. I wasn't sure if Ryan and Derek would ever fully forgive themselves. Maybe that wasn't the point. Guilt had done its work. Realization had planted roots. What mattered now was that peace had finally taken the place of pride. Tomorrow, I'd keep working, keep creating, keep teaching through quiet truth. Because some lessons can't be shouted. They can only be lived. And I'd already lived enough to fill every silence with meaning. The morning sun slanted across the studio floor, golden and quiet, touching everything I'd built from ashes. The machines hummed low, paper stacked neatly beside framed words that once lived in my notebooks. I stood there with a coffee in hand, the ticking of Dad's old watch syncing with my heartbeat. My brothers had gone home weeks ago, but their presence lingered in small ways. A text from Ryan now and then, a photo from Derek's family at dinner. We didn't talk about forgiveness anymore. It had already settled in the spaces between us. The anger that once shaped me had melted into understanding. I realized I didn't win against them. I won against who I used to be. Pride builds walls, but time teaches us how to open doors again. I took a walk through downtown, the same streets that once carried my brokenness. Every corner had a memory. The diner where Jenna first called me a survivor, the park where that little girl asked for her dog's portrait. Now my prints hung in shop windows, not as decoration, but as proof that small things can outgrow ridicule. People nodded or smiled when they recognized me, their warmth steady and human. Fame didn't feel like applause anymore. It felt like responsibility. I stopped at the bridge where I once parked my car, tracing the guardrail with my fingers. The rain had washed away my old pain long ago, but the echo of it still taught me reverence. "You did it," I whispered, not to boast, but to remember the boy who refused to quit. That whisper felt holier than any award I'd ever earned. When I came back to the studio, Jenna was there, sorting invoices and humming softly. "You disappeared again," she said, smiling without looking up. "Old habit," I said, setting down my coffee beside her. She glanced up, eyes soft. "You still go searching for the version of you that hurt?" I nodded. "Sometimes I just need to remind him it all turned out okay." She reached across the desk, touching my hand, grounding me like always. "You did more than okay, Caleb. You built peace." I smiled, not because I believed I was finished, but because I finally understood contentment. Peace isn't loud, and it doesn't arrive with fanfare. It just sits beside you one morning and asks for coffee instead of forgiveness. That night, I spoke at a local community event. Small stage, folding chairs, families scattered through the crowd. I read passages from paper, walls, watching faces soften with quiet recognition. I used to think revenge meant proving everyone wrong, I told them. But the truth is, real revenge is peace. It's waking up without resentment and sleeping without noise. The audience stayed silent for a moment before the applause began. Afterward, a teenager came up, nervous but sincere. "My brother says I'll never make it as a writer," he said. I smiled gently. "Then make him read your book one day," I told him. His grin reminded me of my younger self, hopeful, trembling, stubborn. I realized then that maybe all this pain was just borrowed fuel for someone else's fire. Later, as the studio lights dimmed, I sat by the window with my sketchbook. Outside, the streetlights blurred in the mist, each one a small halo against the dark. I began drawing, not faces or buildings this time, but hands reaching toward each other. They weren't holding, just trying, fingers inches apart. I wrote beneath it, "Peace doesn't erase distance, it just builds a bridge that waits." For years I thought silence was punishment, but now I saw it as preservation. It saved what anger would have burned away. It gave me time to listen, to my heart, to my failures, to the rhythm of forgiveness beating softly beneath it all. That rhythm was my inheritance, passed down not by blood, but by endurance. Ryan called again a few nights later, his voice steadier this time. "Mom says you're writing another book," he said, half curious, half proud. "Something like that," I replied, flipping through my sketches absent-mindedly. "You gonna write about us again?" he asked with a laugh that didn't hide the hope beneath. "Maybe," I said, "but this time, it's not about what you did. It's about what I learned." He was quiet for a moment before whispering, "I hope we make the good chapters this time." I smiled, leaning back in my chair, the city glowing beyond the window. "You already are," I said softly. "You finally started listening. Sometimes love doesn't need new beginnings. It just needs new understanding." Months passed, and the studio became more like home than anything else. The teens I'd hired started calling me Coach instead of Mr. Monroe. They brought me coffee and mismatched mugs and stories about their dreams. I hung their art on the walls beside my own, proud of the cycle continuing. Watching them reminded me that dignity isn't something you own, it's something you teach. Each success they had felt like another piece of my father's legacy stitched back together. One afternoon, I found Ryan's kids waiting outside the studio, shy but smiling. "Dad says you make people's words come alive," the youngest said. I knelt down, smiling. "Not people's words, their truth." She grinned, and I realized the circle had finally closed. One evening, Jenna and I drove out to the lake where Dad used to fish. The sunset melted across the water, gold folding into purple, and quiet. "You ever wish you could go back?" she asked, her voice soft as wind. I thought for a long time before answering. "No," I said finally, because back then I didn't know silence could heal. She rested her head on my shoulder, and we watched the water ripple. The past didn't hurt anymore. It hummed softly, like gratitude. Every cruel word, every empty night, every failure had led here. Forgiveness didn't rewrite the story. It just made the ending worth reading. And somewhere, I hoped my brothers felt the same gentle peace I did now. As the night deepened, I stood by the water and whispered a quiet prayer. For everything I lost, I said, thank you for what I found. The wind carried it across the lake, scattering it like seeds. I thought about that dinner table years ago. The laughter, the humiliation, the silence that followed. All of it had become scripture now, written not in anger, but endurance. My brothers quoted my words these days, but I didn't need credit. I had lived them. The lesson was never about triumph or revenge. It was about wholeness. Because in the end, silence wasn't my weapon. It was my witness. If this story moved you, please like and share. And tell me, should I speak the words they now echo, or let silence keep teaching for me?